Before the gun pressed against her head, before the lies, before the entire town tried to destroy her life, Judge Renee Carter, a black woman who spent her life defending justice, never imagined she would end up begging for breath on the side of a lonely Georgia road, bruised, bleeding, and mocked by the very officers sworn to protect the community. They didn't know who she was. They didn't care who she was, because at that moment, she wasn't a federal judge. She was just another black body they believed they could break. And the most terrifying part, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the opening move of a system built on intimidation, lies, and generational racism, one that had buried the truth for decades and was prepared to destroy anyone who dared expose it. But what these corrupt officials never expected was that the woman they tried to silence, the woman they tried to humiliate, the woman they tried to erase, would become the spark that burned their entire empire to the ground. This is not just a story. This is a warning, a revelation, a mirror held up to America's face. And by the time you finish watching, you will understand how close we all are to become the next name whispered after tragedy. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button to join Racist Reality, the channel that exposes the truth they don't want you to see. Because the more we shine light on injustice, the fewer places it has left to hide. Now, let's begin where the nightmare started, when a routine traffic stop turned into a life-or-death confrontation, and a corrupt police department realized they had targeted the wrong black woman. The gun, the gavel, and the first crack in the system. The barrel of the gun dug hard into Judge Renee Carter's temple, the cold metal biting through her skin until a thin ribbon of blood slid down her cheek. She barely felt the sting anymore. Pain had become background noise, secondary to the realization of where she stood, whose life she now held in her hands, and how this night, this moment, was the end of something rotten that had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. "Not so high and mighty now, are you?" Officer Mark Hayes hissed. His voice vibrated with a strange mixture of triumph and fear, as if he still wasn't entirely sure he had the courage to do what he had come here to do. His hand shook. Not enough for him to notice, but enough for Renee to see. She had spent her career reading people, witnesses, attorneys, victims, liars, abusers, frightened teenagers, hardened criminals. People revealed themselves in the little tremors they didn't know their bodies made. And right now she could see that Officer Hayes, standing in the dim, dusty remains of the old Wilson house, was terrified. He just didn't understand why. The abandoned house smelled of mold and forgotten stories. Dust particles hung suspended in the stagnant air, illuminated by the faint beam of a flashlight dropped on the floor. Cracks split through the faded wallpaper like veins. Every corner held shadows thick enough to swallow the truth. Except tonight, when the truth had come here wearing a badge and gripping a gun too tightly. Renee didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. "You don't know what you've done." But Hayes took her calmness as defiance. "I know exactly what I've done," he spat, pressing the muzzle deeper into her skin. "You people think you can come down here and tell us how to run our town. Pine Ridge doesn't need outsiders, especially not ones who don't know their place." There it was, the quiet poison that had stained the soil of America for generations. "You people." The words lashed at her, not because they surprised her, but because they never stopped cutting, no matter how many times she heard them in depositions, complaints, testimony, or whispered echoes in the hallways of power. But he still didn't know who she was, and that ignorance, more than anything, was the crack forming beneath his feet. A faint siren wailed in the distance. Hayes barely heard it. Renee did. She inhaled slowly, her mind drifting back to just hours earlier, when all she had wanted was an unremarkable drive and a quiet weekend with her sister. The Georgia sun had still been warm when she left Atlanta that afternoon. She wore soft jeans and a simple sweater, the sort of clothes that invited ease rather than authority. Her hands relaxed on the wheel of her old Honda Accord, a car whose familiarity comforted her more than her polished government-issued sedan ever could. For the first time in weeks, her mind drifted, humming along to a jazz track she'd played so often that it felt like an old friend. She wasn't thinking about rulings or federal hearings or civil rights briefs. She was thinking about Monica, Her younger sister, her heart, the reason she still believed in people even after years on the bench. Pine Ridge rose ahead, its aging buildings and sprawling trees giving the illusion of quaint southern charm. But Renee had been a judge too long to trust illusions. Then came the flash of red and blue in her rearview mirror. Her stomach tightened reflexively, an instinct drilled into her long before her law degree. Her father's voice resurfaced from decades ago. "Baby, whenever they pull you over, keep your hands where they can see them. You're a black woman in America. Don't forget that." She slowed, signaled, pulled over, placed her hands visibly atop the wheel. 42 and a 45. She checked twice. Still, she waited, heart steady, breath even. Two officers approached, one on each side, hands resting on their holsters as if they expected war. The older one, with a red neck and a thick jaw, leaned down. His badge read, Hayes. "License and registration," he said slowly and without courtesy, as if reading from a script written in arrogance. Renee offered a calm smile. "Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I was pulled over?" The younger one, Briggs, scoffed loudly. Hayes didn't bother to answer her question. "You were doing 45 and a 30. She blinked. She had seen the sign. "It's a 45 zone." Hayes's jaw hardened. "Are you disagreeing with me? I'm simply clarifying, and I'll gladly provide my documents." She reached toward her purse. But she knew, she knew the atmosphere had already shifted. Years of judicial experience had taught her when an interaction was no longer about law, and when it had become about ego, power, and something far more dangerous. "I'd also like your badge numbers," she said, still in that same measured tone. Everything changed. Hayes leaned in, his face twisting. "Listen here, sweetheart. You people are always causing problems." The words hit Jasmine in part two. They hit Deshawn. They hit half the defendants she'd ever presided over. But they hit her too. Just because she wore a robe in the courtroom didn't mean she was exempt from the cage outside it. She inhaled slowly. "I will provide you my license." "She's reaching!" Briggs suddenly shouted. Chaos detonated. Her door flung open. Hands tore at her arms. The cold metal of the car struck her cheek. Pain radiated through her shoulder as someone twisted her arm violently behind her back. Handcuffs clamped with unnecessary force. Hayes sneered in her ear. "Resisting arrest. Tough break." A car drove by slowly. A teenager in the passenger seat lifted a phone, recording every second. Briggs noticed and sprinted toward the vehicle, screaming for them to leave. Renee, face pressed against the car, memorized the plate. Not out of fear, out of duty. Everything that was happening she had seen in transcripts and photos. She had heard the voices of black men and women pleading for justice, but she had never felt it with her own bones. Not until now. Hayes shoved her into the patrol car. "Nice bag, nice car." "Real funny what you people afford nowadays," he muttered. "Must be a real good hustle." Renee said nothing. Silence could be louder than rage. And right now, silence was strategy. She made a choice then. A quiet, resolute choice. She would not tell them who she was. Not yet. People in power reveal themselves when they believe the person standing before them has none. The Pine Ridge police station greeted her with peeling paint, fluorescent lights that flickered like dying fireflies, and the unmistakable stench of neglect. But the deeper rot wasn't in the walls. It was in the culture. A coffee mug on a desk bore the Confederate flag. A framed whites-only sign decorated another corner, labeled as historic memorabilia. Officers didn't bother hiding the way they eyed her, like she was less than worth their time. They shoved her into a cell already occupied by two other black detainees, a young woman sitting stiffly on a bench and a teen boy pacing anxiously. The door clanged shut. Sound travels differently when you are the one on the inside. The young woman lifted her head. "I'm Jasmine," she whispered. The boy nodded. "I'm Deshawn." Renee nodded back. "Renee." Not Judge Carter, just Renee. Jasmine spoke first. "I got arrested for shoplifting. I had the receipt," Deshawn added. "Loitering, outside my job, waiting for my mom." Their voices carried something heavier than frustration. Defeat. The kind that settles into your bones after too many battles against a system designed for you to lose. Before Renee could respond, heavy footsteps approached. Chief Don Keller appeared, flanked by Hayes and Briggs. His sneer was almost theatrical. "So," he said, "this is the one giving my officers trouble." Renee looked him in the eye. "I want my phone call, Chief Keller." His laugh was cold. "Phone calls are a privilege, and our system's down. You'll spend the night. Judge Pierce will see you tomorrow." Judge Pierce. The name chilled her more than the metal cuffs had. A man known for his law and order stance. A phrase that had, for years, been quiet code for something darker. She held his stare with unwavering calm. She had faced senators, governors, CEOs, murderers. This man was no different. Hours later, when Officer Nate Lopez processed her information, the entire story changed. His face whitened as he read her ID. "You're Judge Renee Carter?" He stumbled backward, breath shaking. "You're a federal judge?" "Yes." He vanished into Keller's office like a man carrying dynamite. Minutes later, the station erupted. Confederate mugs disappeared. Papers flew. Officers straightened uniforms. Keller's voice barked warning. Hayes and Briggs paled. Fear shifted the air. Not fear for Renee. Fear of her power. Fear of what they had done. And fear of what would happen next. Renee watched quietly, blood still dried on her temple, cuffs still marking her wrists, knowing for the first time that night that the ground beneath Pine Ridge's corruption had finally cracked, and she would be the one to split it open. The cell, the silence, and the shadow of a broken system. The moment the station erupted into panic, officers scrambling like ants whose hill had been kicked, Judge Renee Carter did not move. She sat perfectly still on the cold metal bench of the processing area, wrists throbbing from too tight cuffs, temple stained with a thin line of dried blood, watching the spectacle with the detachment of someone who had spent 20 years witnessing lies unravel in slow motion. Chief Don Keller moved frantically through the station, barking orders with a brittle edge. Confederate mugs vanished. A framed whites-only placard, labeled as historic decor, was hastily pulled from a wall and shoved into a desk drawer. Hayes and Briggs hovered in place like children waiting to learn how much trouble they were really in. But beneath the outward chaos, Renee felt something quieter rising. Fear, not hers, theirs. Fear of what they had done. Fear of who she was. Fear of what would happen when the truth finally stepped into the light. Officer Nate Lopez returned to her side, pale and shaken. "Your Honor," he whispered, voice trembling, "Chief Keller will be right out. They're, sorting things out." "Sorting things out," she repeated softly, a phrase that had too often meant bearing evidence, rewriting events, reshaping reality. Tonight she heard it differently, not as a threat, but as confirmation. They knew they had crossed a line they could never cross. 30 minutes earlier, she had been sitting in a cramped holding cell beside Jasmine and Deshawn, listening to their stories unravel in quiet, painful threads. Jasmine, arms wrapped tightly around herself, had spoken in halting breaths. "I bought one bottle of perfume. Just one. I had the receipt in my hand. The owner said I was stealing anyway. When Officer Briggs showed up, he didn't even look at the receipt, just cuffed me and shoved me out the door like I was trash." The word trash trembled in her mouth. Not metaphorically, literally. She had been treated as less than human. And the part that shattered Renee wasn't the wrongful arrest. It was that Jasmine said it with a numbness that suggested this wasn't her first time being humiliated for existing. Then Deshawn had spoken, pacing in tight circles, his shoes scraping the concrete floor. "I get off work every night at 7. My mom's always 10 minutes late picking me up. That's my life. I wait outside the grocery store where I work. Nothing fancy." He paused, swallowing hard. "Officer Hayes rolled up last night and asked what I was doing there. I showed him my employee badge. He still said I looked suspicious. Next thing I know, cuffs, said I was trespassing." He kicked gently at the floor. Not angry, defeated. "I worked there, and I got arrested for being there." Renee had felt something in her chest tighten. A judge hears hundreds of stories like theirs, but hearing them here, inside a cell, while sharing the same stale air, the same helplessness, that was different. A judge is supposed to sit above the suffering, separate from the pain, objective. But tonight, sitting on that cold metal bench, Renee was not separate. She was not insulated. She was not above. She was simply another black body in a broken system designed to cage first and question later. The steel door had clanged shut behind Keller as he left earlier, but the sound still echoed. A sound that symbolized more than incarceration. It symbolized dismissal. A society telling certain people their stories didn't matter. That hurt more than the cuffs. Now, in the processing area, Hayes attempted to regain his facade of authority. He straightened his uniform, cleared his throat, and approached with a forced expression he probably thought looked respectful. "Your Honor," he said stiffly, "if you had just identified yourself at the beginning, all this could have been avoided." The implication struck like a slap. Her rights, her dignity, her safety were all conditional in his mind. Conditional on her title, conditional on power, not inherent, not human. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "The treatment I received should not happen to any citizen, regardless of their position." A muscle twitched in Hayes's jaw. He had been expecting an apology, fear, maybe even gratitude for her impending release. Instead, she gave him the truth, and truth was something corrupt systems feared more than anything. Chief Keller emerged from his office wearing a strained smile that felt like it had been stapled onto his face. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for some escape hatch. "Judge Carter," he said loudly, projecting outward confidence while his hands trembled at his sides, "we seem to have had a misunderstanding." Renee lifted an eyebrow. "Is that what you call it?" He chuckled nervously as officers around the room pretended not to watch. "Well, I assure you, had we known your status, things would have gone differently." "Status," she repeated, letting the word hang between them. He didn't understand that this was already evidence, his own words revealing the selective application of rights in Pine Ridge. As he continued his performance, Renee quietly observed several key details. Officer Briggs frantically clearing papers off a desk. Oversized stacks of citations disproportionately issued to residents of the same neighborhoods. A map pinned on the wall with certain blocks circled in red. A thick binder labeled Code Violations. Oakwood District. Her pulse tightened at the sight of that name. She didn't know it yet, but Oakwood would become the thread that unraveled everything. As Lopez processed her paperwork, he typed her occupation aloud. "Federal Judge, Northern District of Georgia." Then he swallowed again, guilt threading through his voice. "Your Honor, I didn't know." Renee glanced at him. There was fear in his eyes, but also something else. Shame. Not all who serve in broken systems are broken themselves. Some are simply swallowed by the machinery. Some know the wrong around them, but lack the power or the courage to confront it. But Renee saw in Lopez a softness, a hesitation, a conscience. She sensed he would matter later. The holding cell opened, and Jasmine and Deshawn watched with wide eyes as Lopez escorted Renee out. "You're getting out," Jasmine whispered, equal parts relief and heartbreak. "Yes," Renee said gently. "Because you're a judge," Deshawn added quietly. It wasn't a question. "It shouldn't be that way," Renee told them, "and I'm going to make sure of that." Those words weren't a promise. They were a vow, one that had been etched into her soul long before she became a judge, long before she memorized legal statutes, long before she watched people plead for justice that never came. Even as the station buzzed with frantic activity, those two faces, young, weary, hurting, were all she could see. Jasmine with her receipt that no one bothered to check. Deshawn with his employee badge that no one cared to look at. Both victims of a system that assumed guilt before identity. Both victims of the same arrogance that had just dragged her from her car. As Renee walked out of the holding area, she turned back toward them. Jasmine wiped a tear. Deshawn stood tall, as if her courage was contagious. They weren't just witnesses. They were reminders that justice wasn't abstract. It wasn't theoretical. It wasn't paperwork or precedent or procedure. Justice was people. People who deserved dignity. People who deserved safety. People who deserved the simple right to exist without suspicion. And if her position allowed her to fight for those who couldn't, then not using it would be the greatest injustice of all. By the time Renee reached the front of the station, The atmosphere was suffocating. Officers hovered nervously, pretending to be busy. Eyes dropped anywhere except toward her. The air carried the sour smell of fear mixed with embarrassment. Judge Pierce, the local Judge Keller had mentioned, had been called. He arrived wearing an expensive suit and a too-wide smile. "Judge Carter," he said warmly, extending his manicured hand. "I came immediately once I heard of this unfortunate incident." Renee shook his hand, feeling the slipperiness of calculated charm. He continued, "Rest assured we'll clear this up discreetly. No reason to escalate a misunderstanding between professionals." Professionals. He didn't mean officers. He meant himself. People like Pierce didn't protect institutions. They protected power. He leaned in slightly, voice dropping to a hush. "Let's keep this between us, yes? No need to burden our already strained resources with formal complaints." For the first time that evening, Renee allowed a small smile. "I'll give this incident all the attention it deserves, Judge Pierce." He interpreted her politeness as agreement, but he should have paid more attention to her eyes. There was no fear there, only resolve. As she stepped out into the cool night air, dried blood cracking faintly on her temple, Renee inhaled deeply, pain in her wrists, humiliation still lingering, fear simmering beneath her skin, but also something else, purpose, because Pine Ridge had shown her something tonight. A sickness that had been allowed to grow unchecked, a sickness that fed on silence. And now that she had seen it from the inside, she would not remain silent. Not as a judge, not as a black woman, not as a human being. Before leaving, she placed one final call from the station's phone. A coded message, a quiet alarm, a beginning. And just like that, the wheels of justice began to turn. Not for her, but for Jasmine, for Deshawn, and for every unseen victim who had walked through Pine Ridge's doors without someone to fight for them. The night had tried to break her. Instead, it had awakened something unstoppable. The unmasking, panic, power, and the cost of truth. For a long moment after Judge Renee Carter stated her name, the Pine Ridge police station felt like it had been plunged underwater. Everything slowed. Everything thickened. Officer Nate Lopez, whose eyes had just flicked from her ID to her face, stood frozen as if afraid even to breathe. He swallowed hard. "You're Judge Carter? Federal Judge Carter?" Renee nodded with steady calm, though a quiet storm brewed inside her chest. "Yes." Lopez stepped back so quickly he nearly tripped. "Your Honor, I didn't know. None of us knew." A ripple passed through the station, voices stopping mid-sentence, keyboards falling silent, boots scuffing at the floor as officers exchanged alarmed, wide-eyed glances. The shift was instantaneous. Where there had been arrogance, now there was panic. Where there had been assured dominance, now there was frantic calculation. Like watching animals suddenly realize the prey they had mauled was a lion all along. Chief Don Keller burst from his office with a stiffness Renee recognized. Not confidence, but the brittle posture of a man who feels the ground shifting beneath him. "Judge Carter!" he boomed, his tone flipping from condescension to forced warmth. "I hear we've had a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. The word hit Renee like cold water. How casually people in power minimize violence when it came from someone wearing their uniform. Hayes and Briggs stood behind him, their faces pale and tight. Hayes's earlier bravado had drained away like dirty water. Briggs looked like he was trying not to be sick. But Renee didn't stand. She didn't rush to accept apologies meant only to protect reputations. She sat silently at the processing desk, palms resting flat, body steady, gaze fixed forward. Her stillness made them uneasy. It should. Keller gestured widely, speaking for the whole room. "We deeply regret any discomfort you may have endured, Your Honor. Had we known," and there it was, had we known. Her dignity, safety, humanity, conditioned on status, not on being a human being. Renee cut in softly, a scalpel disguised as a whisper. "The treatment I received should not depend on who I am." The sentence landed heavily in the room because nobody could deny its truth, not even Keller. The transformation of the station unfolded with absurd speed. Officers tripped over each other, trying to erase evidence of their day-to-day behavior. The framed Confederate flag mug was shoved into a drawer. A rusting whites-only sign, which had been displayed like a decoration, was yanked off a wall. Papers were shuffled, desks straightened, a sudden enthusiasm for professionalism appearing like a stage production that had been rehearsed for years. If the situation hadn't been so tragic, it would have been darkly comedic. Hayes and Briggs exchanged panicked glances. Hours earlier, they had smirked, mocked, tightened cuffs around her wrists until her skin burned, and dragged her like an animal. Now they stood stiffly behind Keller, terrified of meeting her eyes. Officer Lopez, on the other hand, didn't try to hide his shame. His expression wasn't defensive, it was human. Renee noticed that. She noticed everything. The clamor halted when the doors swung open and Judge Samuel Pierce, Pine Ridge's county judge, entered wearing a polished suit, silver hair slicked neatly back, his smile engineered with political precision. "Judge Carter," he said warmly, extending a hand she reluctantly accepted. "I came immediately once I heard about the unfortunate incident." He emphasized unhappiness as though this entire ordeal were a misplaced file, not an assault on her dignity and constitutional rights. "We take these things very seriously," he continued, loud enough for every officer to hear. "Very seriously indeed." Renee looked at him, reading the subtext beneath his pleasant veneer. "We take them seriously when they threaten us, not when they threaten ordinary people." Pierce leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "We can resolve this quickly and quietly. A misunderstanding among colleagues, nothing more." Colleagues. His word choice made her chest tighten, not with fear, but with clarity. A wall of protection existed here, made up of men who covered for one another, justified each other, shielded each other's misconduct behind courthouse doors and legal technicalities. A system greased not with justice, but with fear, silence, and backroom bargains. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a blueprint. Renee offered a polite nod, letting him misinterpret her calm as compliance. "I'll give this incident all the attention it deserves." Relief washed across Pierce's face, too quickly, too eagerly. He had no idea she meant something very different. After retrieving her belongings, her purse handled nervously by Briggs, who avoided eye contact, Renee asked to make a phone call. "My cell phone died," she said, her voice steady, a lie crafted with precision. Keller nodded quickly. "Of course, Your Honor. Anything you need." Renee dialed with deliberate slowness. A simple call, a coded message, a quiet spark in the dark. "David," she said to her judicial clerk, "I'll need those research briefs we discussed, specifically anything involving discriminatory traffic stops, code enforcement patterns, and property disputes in rural communities." A beat of silence, then his calm reply. "Yes, Judge, I'll begin immediately." Her words sounded ordinary to anyone listening, but they would ignite the first stage of an investigation none of these men could stop. As she exited the station, night air washed over her skin, cool and crisp, stinging her wrist where the cuffs had cut into her. The bruise forming on her temple pulsed with her heartbeat. In the distance, the quiet hum of Pine Ridge seemed unchanged. Houses rested under warm porch lights. The breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth. A passerby would think nothing unusual was happening, but something seismic had shifted. Corruption that had thrived in silence had finally been illuminated, and once exposed to the light, rot has nowhere left to hide. Before leaving, Renee insisted on something Keller hadn't expected. "I want to see the detainees again." His smile faltered. "Of course, if you wish." He led her back through the corridor, past officers who stood straighter than soldiers, avoiding her gaze as though eye contact alone might incriminate them. When she arrived at the holding cell, Jasmine and Deshawn stood abruptly. "You okay?" Jasmine asked softly, voice trembling. Renee nodded. "I'm fine." "But you're getting out," Deshawn said, the weight in his voice unmistakable. "Because you're important." The words hit her like a blow, not because they were wrong, but because they were right. "I'm getting out," Renee said gently, "because they're afraid of who I am." A painful silence filled the space. "But what about us?" Jasmine whispered. Her eyes glistened, not with tears she allowed to fall, but with the ache of someone accustomed to invisibility. Renee stepped closer. "What happened to you matters," she said. "What happened to both of you matters, and I promise you, I'm not walking away from this. She rested her hand on the bars. I wasn't supposed to be in this cell tonight, but maybe I was meant to see what happens when no one is watching. Deshawn exhaled shakily. Nobody ever believes us. I do, she said simply. 3 words. Soft, steady, revolutionary. Outside, the station lights cast long shadows across the parking lot. Renee paused before opening her car door, her fingers resting on the cool metal handle. Her wrists throbbed, her temple ached, her body felt heavy, but her purpose had never felt lighter, never clearer. She had been stripped of her robe tonight, of her title, her status, her shield, and forced to stand fully in the experience of those she served. And in that vulnerability, she had discovered something profound. Power isn't what protects people. Compassion does. Courage does. Truth does. And tonight had revealed how desperately Pine Ridge needed all 3. As she slid into her car, she didn't drive away immediately. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the gravity of the night settle into her bones. The bruises would fade, the humiliation would scar, but the lesson would endure. Silence protects the oppressor, truth protects the oppressed, and her responsibility, her calling, was not to retreat into comfort, but to pull back the curtain on a system that had harmed too many for too long. Tonight had been their mistake. Tomorrow would be her move, and Pine Ridge would never see her coming. The map, the community, and the shadow of something much bigger. The drive to Monica's house unfolded in heavy silence, each mile a weight pressing deeper into Judge Renee Carter's chest. The night air outside the car window looked peaceful. Quiet houses, sleeping dogs, the faint glow of porch lights. But the stillness felt deceptive. Pine Ridge appeared calm on the surface, but beneath that calm lived a sickness the town had learned to hide well. When Renee finally pulled into her sister's gravel driveway, the porch light flickered on automatically, its warm glow washing over the modest 2-story home Monica had built into a sanctuary for neighborhood youth. But tonight it looked different, almost fragile, like the light itself was bracing for what Renee carried through the door. Monica appeared in the doorway before Renee could knock. Her eyes widened at the sight of her sister. Jeans rumpled, sweater stained with dried blood, wrists marked with angry red cuffs. "Oh my God," Monica whispered, voice cracking as she rushed forward. "Renee, what happened? Who did this?" Renee didn't answer immediately. She allowed herself to fall into her sister's arms, not collapsing, but letting down a wall she had held up for hours. Monica's embrace wrapped around her with the familiar scent of lavender lotion and the grounded warmth of someone who had fought her own battles in this town for years. Inside, the house felt safe, too safe, warm, lived in. Photographs of community events lined the walls. A bulletin board displayed flyers for neighborhood programs and youth outreach efforts. Monica didn't just live in Pine Ridge, she fought for it, which made the next part hurt more. Once Renee finished recounting the events of the night, methodically, precisely, like presenting evidence in court, Monica didn't react with shock. She reacted with recognition. She closed her eyes and exhaled a long, bitter breath. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," she murmured. She disappeared into her home office and returned carrying a thick binder labeled in neat handwriting. Pine Ridge documentation, 3 years. Then she opened her laptop, the screen already prepared with maps and spreadsheets. "You're not the first, Renee. Not even close." Renee felt a tremor inside her. She had expected misconduct, even corruption. But the binder, worn at the edges, bulging with papers, affidavits, photographs, told a different story. This wasn't just corruption. This was a system. Monica opened the binder to the first section. Across the top of the page was a name Renee recognized instantly. Oakwood District, a neighborhood she had glimpsed in the citations earlier, and now understood she was meant to see. "Start here," Monica said quietly. The first pages contained testimonies, handwritten statements from residents, typed affidavits, notarized accounts of police stops and code violations. Renee read in silence, her throat tightening with each incident. A woman was fined 3 times in 1 week for grass height violations, even though her lawn matched every neighbor's. A family cited for structural infractions because their porch paint was peeling, while two white-owned homes with worse conditions were untouched. A man was arrested for failure to comply because he didn't answer an officer's question quickly enough. A teenager detained for walking home from basketball practice after dark. Every page exposed another wound, another life disrupted. "It never stops," Monica said, "and no one listens." Renee kept flipping pages, photographs of cracked windows, damaged doors, bruised wrists, muddy footprints officers left after trampling gardens during inspections, all stamped, logged, cataloged. Monica had built a legal archive, not for court, but for survival. Renee swallowed hard. "How long has this been happening?" "Decades," Monica replied, sinking into the chair opposite her. "But the last 3 years, it's different. It's coordinated." That word struck Renee like a blow. "Coordinated?" Monica nodded and clicked onto a digital map on her laptop. Red dots covered the Oakwood district. Houses, lots, small businesses. These are the properties that have been harassed, cited, fined, or seized in the last 36 months. Renee leaned closer. A pattern emerged instantly, clusters converging in specific, strategic areas. Not random, not incidental, targeted. Next, Monica pulled up a spreadsheet. "Now look at this." Column after column displayed recent property sales in Oakwood. Almost everyone was marked well below market value, and nearly every buyer was the same: Crane Development Group. Renee's voice was soft but sharp. "Who's Crane?" "Victor Crane," Monica replied bitterly, "a developer out of Atlanta. Came here 5 years ago claiming he wanted to revitalize Pine Ridge. People thought he meant renovating the downtown strip. Turns out he meant displacing the entire black neighborhood." Renee blinked slowly, absorbing the words. The next slide hit harder. A grid of photographs. Property owners who had refused Crane's buyout offers. Each had their own column of escalating citations. Some had foreclosure notices. Some had court judgments signed by... Renee frozen. "Judge Pierce," she whispered. Monica nodded grimly. "Every single one." Pieces began snapping into place in Renee's mind with terrifying clarity. "Monica, are you telling me the judge, the police department, and Crane? Are we working together?" Monica finished. "Yes." Renee felt the air thicken around her. "You're looking at a coordinated effort to push black residents out of Oakwood," Monica continued. "They've been doing it slowly, quietly, trying to avoid backlash. But Crane wants to break ground on his luxury complex next year. So they're accelerating the pressure. Every citation, every arrest, every threat is disguised as a code violation. It wasn't accidental. It was strategy. And her arrest, her humiliation on the highway, her bruised wrists, her bleeding temple, not coincidence. A symptom of a disease that had spread far deeper than she imagined. Renee turned the binder's page and saw detailed lists of families threatened with foreclosure. Letters from residents describing constant intimidation, a video of officers towing a resident's car without cause, hand-drawn maps from children showing houses disappearing from their street. "This is wrong," Renee whispered, her voice trembling in a way she rarely allowed. "It's evil," Monica corrected softly. Renee looked up at her sister. Monica's eyes shimmered not with tears, but with righteous fury. "I've been gathering this for years," Monica said. "I thought if we had enough evidence, someone would help. But every attorney I spoke to backed out as soon as Pierce got involved." Renee closed her eyes briefly, pain pulsing through her wrists. "I saw 2 kids in that cell," she murmured. "Jasmine and Deshawn. Their stories match the binder." Monica nodded. "There are dozens more." Renee pressed her hand to her forehead. "This is systemic misconduct. It's racial targeting. It's an abuse of the judiciary. It's exactly why you were meant to see it," Monica interrupted gently. "You're the only one with the authority and the courage to take this on." Renee inhaled sharply. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing truth despite fear. She felt both now, fear of what she'd uncovered and certainty that backing down would betray Jasmine, Deshawn, every displaced family, and even the ancestors who had fought for civil rights long before she was born. Still, she asked the question anyway. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Monica's gaze softened. I didn't want you to put your career at risk. Renee reached across the table, placing her hand over her sister's. My career isn't more important than justice. Monica's eyes glistened. Then let me show you the last part. She flipped to the section she had been hesitant to reveal. A name written across the top in bold letters. Attorney Malcolm Reeves. Disbarment proceedings. Renee frowned. I know that name. He tried to challenge Crane's development 2 years ago, Monica said. Brought forward affidavits from Oakwood residents, filed injunctions, pushed for investigations. And, Renee asked gently, Pierce reported him for ethics violations, Monica answered, her voice tight with anger. Fabricated misconduct. Reeves nearly lost everything. He had to withdraw to save his license. Renee leaned back, stunned by the cruelty and the precision of the scheme. They don't just silence victims, she said slowly. They destroy anyone who tries to defend them. That's why people stop fighting, Monica whispered. Fear keeps them quiet. Renee closed the binder gently, reverently, like one might close a book of sacred records, because that's what this was, the testimony of a community betrayed. This is bigger than a bad traffic stop, she murmured. It's bigger than misconduct. This is a civil rights crisis. Monica nodded, her voice breaking. I know. Renee stood, a fire igniting inside her, a fire she had not felt in years, not since her early days as a public defender, not since she learned that justice is not delivered from the bench alone. We're going to fight this, she said, voice steady and strong. Not just for me, not just for you, but for every person in Oakwood who has been silenced, intimidated, or pushed out of their homes. Monica stepped closer. Renee, this is dangerous. So is letting injustice go unchecked, she replied. Her wrists still burned, her temple still throbbed. But the pain wasn't a weakness, it was fuel. Because the truth wasn't just calling her, it was depending on her. And from this moment on, she knew the system wasn't going to correct itself. It was going to have to be confronted. Exposed, dismantled, not tomorrow, not someday, now. The retaliation, smear, silence, and the cost of speaking truth. Morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen window of Monica Carter's home, but its warmth did nothing to soften the chill in the room. Judge Renee Carter sat at the table, nursing a cup of cooling tea, her wrists aching faintly with every movement. The bruises had deepened overnight, dark purples and angry reds blooming across her skin like unwelcome confessions. Monica hovered across from her, pacing with the restless anxiety of someone who knew far too well how Pine Ridge responded when its power was threatened. You need to see this, Monica finally said, setting her phone in front of her sister. A headline glared from the screen of the Pine Ridge Gazette. Federal Judge Carter detained after erratic driving. Concerns raised about mental stability. Renee frozen. Her own face stared back at her. An image clearly pulled from a courtroom photograph, solemn and dignified, but now surrounded by sensational claims. The article was written in a tone of feigned neutrality. Sources inside the Pine Ridge Police Department report that Judge Carter appeared agitated and uncooperative. Witnesses describe unusual behavior consistent with potential impairment. Local authorities handled the situation with professionalism and concern for public safety. There was no mention of the bruises, no mention of being slammed against her car, no mention of Jasmine or Deshawn, but there was an entire paragraph questioning whether stress from high-level judicial responsibility had caused her to snap. Renee read it slowly, calmly, intellectually, but inside something broke. Not her resolve, her illusion. The illusion that truth always prevails if spoken clearly enough. The illusion that justice had weight simply because it was righteous. The illusion that those with power would hesitate to lie if their careers depended on it. Monica watched her sister carefully. Pierce is behind this, or Keller, or both. Renee finally spoke, voice low. This wasn't written to inform the public. It was written to discredit me before I even opened my mouth. She turned the phone around again, reading the headline a second time. They're trying to frame me as unstable. Monica nodded grimly. If they can make people question your mental state, they can dismiss everything you say after that. It was a tactic as old as segregation and as polished as modern PR. Silence her by shaming her, discredit her by distorting her, break her credibility before she can break their system. Renee exhaled slowly, setting the phone down. This is how they protect themselves, she murmured, by contaminating the truth before it reaches daylight. The retaliation unfolded so quickly, it felt orchestrated, because it was. By noon, Monica's community center, Maple Ridge Center, received an envelope from Pine Ridge Code Enforcement citing 7 violations that had unexpectedly appeared overnight. Faulty wiring, futurary unsafe ceiling tiles, inadequate bathroom ventilation, outdated fire extinguishers. Simon, structural weakness in the back storage room. Nestorber's soil instability near the playground. Arpurshi Edler Martin, potential mold contamination. The order was stamped in bold red. Facility to be closed within 48 hours pending inspection. Monica's face drained of color as she read through the pages. This is impossible, she whispered. None of this is real. Renee took the documents, scanning them with judicial precision. This isn't about safety, she said. This is about silencing you. The center was Monica's life's work, her anchor, her calling. It was where children gathered after school, where parents sought support, where families found food assistance and tutoring and hope. To shut it down was to gut the heart of Maple Ridge. Renee looked deeper into the documents. Every violation was signed by the same inspector. Hayes recommended the inspection, Renee muttered. Of course he did. Monica sank into a chair. They're coming after you because you're connected to me, Renee continued softly. This is retaliation. Monica looked up, voice trembling. Then what happens to Jasmine? To Deshawn? To all the people in Oakwood? If this is what they do to me just for keeping records, what do you think they've done to families who can't fight back? Her sister's fear wasn't selfish. It was communal. It was rooted in love. Renee reached for her hand. We'll fight this. You won't lose the center. But even as she spoke it, they both knew winning would not come without cost. The next blow came mid-afternoon. Renee's phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. Your Honor, please come to the detention center. It was Officer Lopez. When she arrived, Lopez met her outside, anxiety etched across his face. It's Deshawn, he said quietly. He was rearrested this morning. Renee's stomach dropped. For what? Lopez hesitated. For possession with intent to distribute. She stared at him in disbelief. Deshawn works at a grocery store, Renee said. He barely makes enough to take the bus. He doesn't even own a car. What evidence do they have? Lopez swallowed hard. They said he had a bag of marijuana in his backpack. Renee narrowed her gaze, reading between the lines. You don't believe that? Lopez shook his head quickly. No, ma'am. I've arrested kids with drugs. They panic. They lie. They break down. But Deshawn, he just kept saying, it's not mine. I swear it's not mine. And I believe him. Renee closed her eyes. Planting drugs on black youth was an old tactic. A vile tactic. A tactic designed to dismantle futures before they could begin. She felt something burning inside her chest. Rage, sorrow, and the crushing weight of knowing that silence had allowed Pine Ridge to destroy too many like him. What's his bail? She asked quietly. Lopez flinched. 15,000. It was obscene. It was intentional. It was cruel wearing the mask of procedure. Pierce approved it, Lopez added. Of course he did. Renee took a breath, grounding herself. Let me speak with him. In the holding area, Deshawn sat on a bench, his shoulders hunched, his eyes hollow. When he saw her, he straightened abruptly. Judge Carter? His voice cracked. I didn't do this, I promise. They're saying I had drugs. But I didn't. Renee sat beside him, her voice steady but gentle. I believe you. His lips quivered. No one else does. She shook her head. I do, and I'm not leaving you here. He wiped at his eyes, embarrassed by the tears. I'm scared, he whispered. I feel like they're trying to make me into something I'm not. Renee looked at him with painful understanding. You're not wrong, she said softly, but you're not alone anymore. As she left the station, the weight of what she was up against felt suffocating. A smear campaign to discredit her, a fabricated closure to silence Monica, a false arrest to punish Deshawn, threats lurking behind every whispered accusation. This was not just retaliation. This was a war, not fought with guns or bombs, but with lies, paperwork, intimidation, and the bending of the legal system into a weapon. Renee had seen injustice before, but she had never been inside its jaws like this. Determined, she drove to the office of Damon Reynolds, a civil rights attorney known for taking cases no one else would touch. His small building sat squeezed between a barber shop and a church, every inch of its exterior shouting underdog. Inside, the waiting area was lined with towering piles of case files. Damon worked alone without staff, fueled by passion and exhaustion in equal measure. He looked up when Renee entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Judge Carter? What brings you here?" She explained everything, briefly but with precision. Damon listened without interrupting, his expression darkening. When she finished, he leaned back in his creaking chair, rubbing his temples. "I've been trying to take down Keller and Pierce for years," he admitted, "but every time I get close, Pierce buries the case, or witnesses disappear, or evidence gets lost." He pointed toward a stack of dusty folders. "These are all the families who came to me. I fought for them, but the system in Pine Ridge is locked down tight. No one, no judge, no regulator, no state official ever pushes back." He paused. "Until now." Renee met his eyes. "This isn't about me," she said quietly. "This is about Oakwood, about Monica, about Deshawn, about Jasmine, about every person who has been terrorized by a system designed to crush them." Damon nodded slowly. "You know they're going to hit back harder, right? They're already attacking your reputation. Next comes threats, pressure, maybe worse." Renee's bruised wrist throbbed once more. "I'm aware," she said, "but I don't scare easily. And even if I did, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite it." He studied her in silence for a long moment, then said, "Judge Carter, I think you might be the only person in Georgia who can break this open." She didn't deny it, not because she felt powerful, but because she felt responsible. As dust settled over Pine Ridge, Renee drove back to Monica's house with a new clarity. The retaliation had exposed a truth the system had hoped she'd never see. Pine Ridge wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as those in power intended, and that meant the only way to fix it was to confront it head-on. From the street corner, she saw neighborhood children playing basketball under a flickering street lamp. Their laughter floated into the night, innocent and unaware of the weight she carried. She watched them for a moment. Boys and girls who deserved a safer world, a fairer world, a kinder world. A world where growing up black didn't mean learning to fear the flashing of blue lights. A world where justice wasn't reserved for the privileged. A world where authority didn't crush the vulnerable. And she realized she wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for them, for Jasmine, for Deshawn, for her sister, for every voice buried under lies and intimidation. The road ahead would be dangerous, but truth, real truth, had finally taken root. And once truth is planted, injustice can no longer hide in the dark. Tonight, Pine Ridge had declared war. Tomorrow, Renee would declare something stronger, justice. The whistleblower, a quiet man with dangerous truths. Night settled over Pine Ridge like a heavy blanket, thick, unmoving, suffocating. For Judge Renee Carter, the darkness outside Monica's window mirrored the uncertainty closing in around her. The smear campaigns, the retaliation, the fabricated arrest of a teenage boy, the engineered closure of a community center meant to uplift a neighborhood, but the most dangerous blows were the invisible ones, the ones she hadn't seen yet. She sat at Monica's kitchen table, sorting through her notes, reports, timestamps, and the testimonies of those who trusted her. Her wrists still ached from the handcuffs. Her mind pulsed with exhaustion she had no space to honor. Monica entered quietly and set a cup of herbal tea beside her. "You're shaking," she whispered. "I'm processing," Renee murmured. "You're unraveling," Monica corrected, voice heavy with worry. "And you can't help anyone if you fall apart." Renee looked at her sister, her rock, her mirror, the person who saw her even when she wished she weren't visible. "I don't have the luxury of breaking," Renee whispered. Before Monica could respond, Renee's phone buzzed. A single text. Unknown number. No signature. Not everyone here is blind. Meet me tonight. Midnight. Pine Ridge Courthouse lot. I have information. Monica stiffened. That sounds like a trap. Or, Renee said softly, it's exactly the break we've been waiting for. She stood. The ache in her back reminded her that justice was not just a concept. It was a physical burden, a weight carried through pain and darkness. And tonight, that weight would grow heavier. She arrived 10 minutes early, parking under a dim street lamp that flickered like an indecisive warning. The courthouse stood before her, tall, cold, the birthplace of many lost battles for Black residents who walked in hoping for justice and left carrying despair. Renee stepped out of her car, pulling her coat tight around her. The air was cool, but tension made her skin hot, almost feverish. A figure hovered near the far end of the lot, tall, broad shoulders, hands buried in his pockets. Renee approached with cautious steps. Officer Lopez? She guessed. The figure turned. Not Lopez. Another officer, young, startled, nervous. His name tag read, Daniels. Nathan Daniels. He swallowed hard when he saw her. Judge Carter, he whispered. Renee's breath caught. This was unexpected. This was dangerous. This felt real. I saw what they did to you, he began, eyes glancing around as though shadows themselves were listening. And I saw how they looked when they realized who you were. They weren't surprised you were hurt. They were surprised you were powerful. Renee took one step closer. Why did you call me? Nathan Daniels looked like a man torn in half, between duty and conscience, between survival and integrity. When I joined the department, he whispered, I thought I'd be helping people. I thought Pine Ridge needed officers who were fair, honest. But this place, Chief Keller, Sergeant Pierce, the judges, they have a system. His voice faltered. A system built on race. Renee didn't speak. Every word he said mattered too much to interrupt. I've been trying to ignore it, he admitted, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But then I saw what they did to that kid last month. Marcus Williams, arrested for loitering outside his job. He showed them his ID, his schedule, everything. But it didn't matter. Renee knew the story. Every judge and prosecutor in the region knew the story, if they cared to look. And then, Daniels continued, I saw what they did to you. Silence thickened the space between them. You don't change a system by whispering, but sometimes whispers are where revolutions begin. I have proof, Daniels said finally. Emails, dashcam footage, internal memos. Keller keeps a private drive. We all know about it. It's where he stores everything he doesn't want the city or the state to see. And Pierce, he has a bonus system. Renee frowned. What kind of bonus system? Daniel swallowed. For arrests in Oakwood. Her chest tightened. They call it community stabilization, but it's racial targeting, quotas, encouragement to escalate situations. They say it's to reduce crime, but crime isn't the goal. He lifted his eyes to meet hers. Property is. The words hit Renee like a blow. Everything Monica had documented, everything Oakwood residents had whispered about, everything Jasmine and Deshawn had endured. It wasn't random, it wasn't accidental, it was engineered. How far does it reach? She asked softly. Daniels hesitated. Farther than you think. Developers, judges, police, code enforcement, they're all connected, and they think no one will ever challenge them. He took a shaky breath. But you did. Renee stood in stillness, absorbing his words like shards of glass. Why are you helping me? She asked gently. Daniels looked away, blinking back something raw. My grandmother lost her home in a scheme like this, he said quietly. Different town, same tactics. They drained her with fines, inspections, and lies until she had nothing left. She died in a nursing home, still calling it her house. His voice broke. I didn't join the police to be part of that. I can't watch this happen to another community. Not again. Renee felt her throat tighten. Pain can make people bitter, or pain can make people brave. Daniels had chosen bravery. What do you need from me? He whispered. Renee stepped closer, lowering her voice. I need evidence that cannot be buried. Documents, videos, emails, anything showing who gave orders, when, and why. Daniels nodded shakily. I can get it, but I need protection. If Keller suspects me, he won't, Renee said softly. Not yet. His eyes widened with fear and hope, and something like relief. I'll contact you tomorrow, he whispered. There's one more thing. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a flash drive. I copied this off a dash cam before Pierce deleted the original. It's your traffic stop. Renee frozen. Her hands shook as she accepted the small device. The audio, he said, voice trembling, is bad, but not gone. You'll hear enough. And the video shows they lied about everything. Renee swallowed. This wasn't just evidence. It was truth. And truth is the most dangerous weapon in a corrupt system. Back at Monica's house, Renee plugged the flash drive into her laptop. Monica hovered behind her, murmuring silent prayers. The video loaded. A shaky image of Renee's Toyota pulled over on a rural road. Sergeant Pierce approached with aggression in his movements, not caution. Officer Keller circled the passenger side like a predator assessing prey. Their hands are already near their weapons. Their voices are sharp, commanding, dripping with hostility. Then the moment that changed everything. She's reaching! Daniels was right. The audio was messy, but not gone. It was clear enough to expose lies, clear enough to reveal intent, clear enough to destroy careers. When the officers yanked her from the car, the camera caught the brutality, the unnecessary force, the contempt on their faces, the casual cruelty of men who had done this too many times to count. Monica covered her mouth. Oh my God, Renee! Renee didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move, because she knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about her. It was about every Black person who never had a camera, every family who never got justice, every child is terrified of police lights. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from clarity. They've been doing this for years, she whispered, and getting away with it. Monica placed a hand on her shoulder. Not anymore. The next morning, the retaliation escalated. A brick smashed Monica's window, wrapped in a note scribbled with menace. Back off. Last warning. Phone calls from blocked numbers followed. Drop this. Stop digging. You don't know who you're dealing with. But Renee did know. That was the terrifying part. She turned to Monica and said, This isn't about scaring us. This is about silencing an entire neighborhood. Monica's voice was firm. Then we won't be silent. For the first time in days, Renee felt a surge of strength. Not the kind born from authority, but the kind born from community. Fear isolates, truth unites, and unity dismantles systems built on discrimination. Renee contacted Damon Reynolds and shared the new evidence. His eyes widened. This changes everything, he whispered. This is enough to spark a federal investigation. She nodded. But it's not enough to win. Not yet. We need more. We need airtight proof. Then, Damon said slowly, we're going to build the strongest civil rights case Pine Ridge has ever seen. Renee breathed deeply, because justice was no longer a dream. It was a plan dangerous enough that those in power would fight to crush it, a plan strong enough to finally give voice to Maple Ridge, Oakwood, and every resident harmed by Pine Ridge's discriminatory machinery. Tonight, Renee had met a young officer whose conscience outweighed his fear, and because of him, the system that had survived for decades finally felt its first fracture. The net tightens. Power trembles when truth dares to speak. Morning crept into Pine Ridge with a deceptive stillness, birds chirping softly, cars humming along Main Street, the town appearing almost idyllic from afar. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Judge Renee Carter sat in Monica's living room staring at the flash drive Daniels had given her the night before. Her coffee had gone cold. Her mind had not. Monica emerged from the kitchen holding a plate of toast she knew Renee would need. You didn't sleep, Monica said gently. Could you? Renee asked. Her sister didn't reply. The day ahead felt heavier than the bruises on Renee's wrists, because now she had proof. Dangerous proof. Proof that could change lives. Proof that could end careers. Proof that could ignite a firestorm of retaliation. but also proof that could restore dignity and justice to a community that had been screaming for years into a void. And once truth begins to claw its way into the light, injustice grows frantic. Today, Pine Ridge's power brokers would begin to panic. Across town in the wood-paneled office of Judge Martin Pierce, the storm was already brewing. Pierce paced behind his desk like a man accustomed to control, yet suddenly sensing he was standing on sand. Papers lay scattered across the table. A printout of the Gazette article smearing Renee, notes from the city council, and a report from Sergeant Keller. Keller stood stiffly near the door, uniform crisp, jaw clenched with the familiar arrogance of a man used to acting without consequences. "She's been too quiet," Pierce muttered. "Too calm." Keller shrugged. "Maybe the article did its job. Her colleagues must be questioning her by now." "No," Pierce snapped. "You don't understand her. Judges like Carter. They don't fold. They don't hide. They calculate." He paused. "And right now, she's calculating something." Keller narrowed his eyes. "You think she's building a case?" Pierce turned sharply, face pale. "I think she's doing more than that." "What makes you say that?" Pierce hesitated, then admitted in a low voice. "I saw her at the courthouse yesterday. She was reviewing property records. Oakwood records. She's digging in places she shouldn't." Keller stiffened. Pierce continued. "If she connects the dots, the code violations, the land transfers, the citations, she'll expose everything." He didn't need to specify what everything meant. Keller's entire career hinged on that silence. Pierce's influence depended on that silence. The development deal for Maple Ridge, the lucrative multi-million-dollar project that developer William Cole had promised, depended on that silence. The entire corrupt machine of Pine Ridge operated on it. Keller stepped forward, lowering his voice. "We could move her out of the equation." Pierce swallowed hard. "We need discretion." Keller smirked. "Discretion is what we do best." Meanwhile, back at Monica's house, Renee and civil rights attorney Damon Reynolds were building something powerful. A timeline, an evidentiary map, a case that traced discrimination not as isolated events, but as a coordinated, intentional pattern. Damon spread documents across the dining table. Copies of unjust code violations, Sofrini, statements from Oakwood residents, a list of properties purchased under suspicious circumstances, arrest logs showing racial disparities, dashcam footage from Renee's own arrest, notes from Monica's 3-year community documentation project. "This is bigger than we thought," Damon whispered. "It always is," Renee replied softly. "When a system is built on discrimination, it doesn't need to hide. It simply needs to exist long enough for people to call it normal." Damon looked at her with something like awe. "You realize," he said slowly, "that you're going to bring down half of Pine Ridge with this." Renee paused, hands stilling over a stack of files. "I don't want to bring down the town," she said. "I want to free the people living in it." Monica watched her sister quietly. There it was, Renee's moral compass. The thing that made her a judge not simply by title but by calling. But righteousness has a price, and today they would find out how high that price was. At noon, a black SUV rolled slowly down Maple Ridge Lane, stopping across the street from Monica's house. Renee noticed it first. The windows were tinted so dark they reflected the world like a mirror. The engine didn't cut off. The driver didn't step out. The vehicle simply sat there, watching, waiting. Monica's blood went cold. "They're sending a message," she whispered. Renee nodded. "They want us to know we're being watched." She stepped outside onto the porch and met the SUV's reflective glass with steady, unblinking eyes. She didn't flinch. She wanted them to see that she would not be cowed. After 2 long minutes, the SUV drove off, but the imprint of its presence lingered like a bruise. "They're becoming desperate," Damon said, arms crossed. "Evidence scares them. Truth threatens them." Renee exhaled, steady but heavy-hearted. "When people in power fear losing it, they become dangerous." The danger arrived faster than any of them expected. That afternoon, a new article appeared in the Gazette. Questions rise over Judge Carter's judicial fitness. Sources claim erratic behavior. It included fabricated eyewitness statements, a psychological expert who wasn't real, anonymous quotes from officers describing unstable conduct, Monica threw the newspaper down in disgust. This is a character assassination. Renee's jaw tightened. This means they're scrambling. Damon scanned the article. They're worried. That means they'll make mistakes. But the smear campaign was having an impact. Renee received calls from colleagues in Atlanta, some supportive, many cautious, a few coldly formal. Her reputation was being chipped away deliberately, surgically. And reputation for a black woman in power was not just professional currency, it was armor. And they were trying to strip it from her piece by piece. At 3 p.m., Renee received a call, a number she recognized. Judge Carter? It was Officer Daniels. His voice was trembling. They know I accessed the drive. Blood rushed to Renee's ears. What happened? I walked into the locker room. Keller was there. He asked me why I'd been staying late, why I'd checked out equipment I didn't need. He kept staring at me like he already knew. Renee closed her eyes. Where are you now? In my car. I drove off as soon as I could. Judge Carter, I think they're going to frame me. Or worse. Renee motioned urgently for Damon to come to the phone. Listen to me carefully, she said. You cannot go home. You cannot go back to the station. Drive to the federal building in Atlanta. Ask for Special Agent Collins. Tell him I sent you. Daniels swallowed audibly. Do you think they'll kill me? Renee's voice softened. I think you've shown more courage than any of those men ever will. And courage terrifies cowards. He exhaled shakily. I'm on my way. As she hung up, her hands trembled. Monica touched her wrist gently. You okay? No, Renee whispered. I'm furious. Because Daniels was risking everything. His career, his safety, his family's future. Not for reward, not for glory, but because he believed in doing what was right. This is what America could be, she thought. This is what America should be. People standing up for one another, people protecting the vulnerable, people refusing to remain silent in the face of injustice. At sunset, as Renee and her team were concluding their review of evidence, Damon suddenly froze. Renee, he said quietly, staring at a legal document in his hand. You need to see this. She took the paper. Her eyes widened. It was a demolition order, signed by Judge Pierce, stamped urgent. Target, Maple Ridge Community Center. Demolition date, 48 hours from now. Monica's breath caught in her throat. They can't do that. They can't destroy the center. They can, Damon said grimly, and they plan to. Renee felt heat rising in her chest. This is the final piece, she whispered. This shows intent. They're moving fast because they know we're close. Damon nodded. That means we need to move faster. Renee stood, shoulders squared, gaze burning with purpose. Then we will. Because justice was not passive. It was not gentle. It was not polite. Justice was a force, a demand, a responsibility. And when those sworn to uphold it chose corruption instead, it became the duty of ordinary people, an extraordinary courage to reclaim it. Tonight, Pine Ridge's corrupt leaders were tightening their grip. But what they didn't know was that Judge Renee Carter had already woven a net around them, one made of truth, community, evidence, and unstoppable resolve. And tomorrow, that net would begin to close. The fall of power, when truth rises, injustice trembles. Dusk bled across Pine Ridge like a final warning. The old Westwood house, once the pride of Oakwood's first black doctor, stood in a haunting silhouette against the twilight sky. Its boarded windows and overgrown yard whispered of history stolen, homes robbed, and promises broken. Tonight, it would become the battleground where truth would finally confront corruption. Judge Renee Carter sat in her car at the edge of the circular driveway, staring up at the house's peeling white paint. Each breath felt both heavy and steady, as though her lungs carried the weight of every testimony, every tear, every injustice she'd uncovered. She checked her watch. 7:58 p.m. The trap was set. Federal marshals were positioned in the woods beyond the property line, out of sight but ready. 4 hidden cameras, installed earlier through secured channels, captured every angle of the parlor inside. All streams fed directly to a protected federal database. Monica had begged her not to come alone. Damon had warned the risk was too great. But Renee knew something they didn't. Systems built on fear only crumble when someone refuses to be afraid. She stepped out of her car and walked toward the house. Dead leaves crackled beneath her shoes, each step echoing in the vast, lonely silence. Inside, the parlor was dim. Dust floated through the air like unsettled ghosts. Renee stood near the center of the room, her posture calm, her heartbeat anything but. She did not carry a weapon. Only courage. Only truth. Only the righteous audacity of a black woman who had spent her entire life learning how to stand firm in a world eager to tilt the scales against her. She waited, not with fear, with purpose. Headlights splashed across the faded wallpaper as a dark sedan crept up the driveway. The engine cut off. Doors slammed. Heavy footsteps approached. Renee steadied her breath. Sergeant Derek Keller entered first, flashlight sweeping the shadows. Officer Brian Hayes followed, blocking the exit, as expected. Keller's voice slithered with false professionalism. Well, Judge Carter. Interesting place to take a stroll. Hayes chuckled. Planning to buy the place, Judge? Or maybe meeting someone? Renee spoke with the calm precision of someone entirely in control. I assume Chief Pierce knows you're here. Both men stiffened. Keller's smirk returned, though thinner this time. This is routine patrol, he said. Lots of break-ins lately. Imagine our surprise seeing a federal judge trespassing. Renee didn't move. You patrol abandoned properties with flashlights and 2 armed officers? Interesting. Keller took a slow step toward her, expression tightening. You've been asking questions, looking where you shouldn't, digging into things that don't concern you. They concern every citizen of Oakwood, she replied. Hayes scoffed. Citizens? You mean those troublemakers? That neighborhood is nothing but crime. Renee's eyes sharpened. That neighborhood is full of families you harass, teenagers you frame, homeowners you find bankrupt, people you push off their land because coal development wants their property. Silence cracked. Hayes shifted uneasily. Keller stepped closer, jaw clenched. You need to stop talking, Keller said, his voice dropping into a dark register. You're interfering with local operations. You're threatening jobs, money, projects that could benefit the entire town. Benefit who? Renee demanded. Developers? Judges? Officers on bonus quotas? Keller's nostrils flared. Where'd you hear that? He snapped. You just confirmed it, Renee said quietly. Keller blinked. He'd slipped, and he knew it. He stepped closer, now only inches from her, his body language predatory. You think anyone will believe you? He hissed. Your own colleagues think you're unstable. Pierce already filed concerns about your mental fitness. You're one news article away from suspension. Hayes crossed his arms smugly. No one's going to listen to you, not over us. Renee held her ground with a stillness that radiated both power and sorrow. This isn't about who they listen to, she whispered. It's about what they see. Hayes sneered. And what are they seeing? Renee looked directly into the nearest camera, hidden behind a dusty ceramic vase. Everything, she said softly. Keller frowned. What? Before he could process it, Renee added, Tell me the truth, Sergeant. How many families have you pushed out of Oakwood? How many false charges have you approved? How many lives have you destroyed for property money? The dam broke. Keller snarled. You don't know anything. We kept order in this town. We got rid of the trash so development could move forward. Pierce backed every decision. Cole paid for efficiency. The people we removed, criminals, all of them. Children, Renee snapped. Grandmothers? 15-year-old boys walking home from work? Keller pointed at her, voice rising. They were obstacles. Obstacles to progress. If people got hurt, if people died, then that's on them for resisting. Hayes flinched. Keller. But Keller was unraveling now, ego bleeding into confession. This town needed cleansing, he said. And you got in the way. So yeah, we planned to make it look like you were unstable. Maybe drunk, maybe violent. And if you didn't back down, he reached for his holster. Renee didn't move. Then you'd have a tragic accident, Keller finished. The air went still. Hayes's eyes widened as he realized what Keller had just said. And then Renee spoke 3 words. Steady, certain, final. Federal marshals, now! The house exploded with movement. Windows shattered inward. Flashlights blazed through the dark. Voices thundered. Federal marshals! Hands where we can see them! Keller spun, stunned, reaching for his weapon. But he was tackled before he touched it. Hayes froze, hands raised, eyes wide with terror. Renee stood perfectly still as the chaos swirled around her. Authority stripped, power exposed, brutality arrested, justice, real justice, finally entering a room Pine Ridge had kept dark for decades. Every door that had once been closed to justice was forced open that night. Judge Pierce tried to flee in his Lexus. He didn't make it 2 miles. At Cole's office, documents were still being shredded when agents stormed in. Cole tried bribing them. It didn't work. He left the building in handcuffs. Chief Keller screamed about jurisdiction. Agent Collins simply said, "You gave that up the moment you broke federal law." One by one, the pillars of Pine Ridge's corrupt system fell, and at dawn, Renee Carter returned to the detention center, this time with authority restored, truth uplifted, and courage radiant. She asked to see Deshaun. The boy's eyes widened when she entered. Am I getting out?" he whispered. Renee nodded, voice warm with pride and heartbreak. "You're free, sweetheart, and none of this was your fault." He burst into tears. Not because he was weak, but because for the first time in his young life, someone in power had fought for him instead of against him. Later that afternoon, Renee visited Oakwood, where families gathered outside the community center, laughing, crying, embracing, finally believing that justice was not a myth. Monica held Renee's hand as they walked through the crowd. Children ran up to her, parents thanked her, the elders blessed her. Tasha, Jasmine, and Deshaun stood together, no longer victims, but voices. Voices that mattered. Voices that would shape the future. A future built not on fear, but on unity. Not on silence, but on truth. Not on power, but on love. Weeks passed. Trials began. Truths emerged. Dozens of charges were filed. Policies were rewritten. The DOJ opened broader investigations. And Pine Ridge, slowly, beautifully, began to heal. One afternoon, during a quiet moment on the courthouse steps, a young girl approached Renee. She couldn't have been more than 9. Her braids shimmered in the sunlight. "Are you the judge who stopped the bad people?" she asked. Renee knelt to her level. "I'm one of many who helped," she said softly. "But the real heroes are the people who stood up. People who told the truth, even when they were scared." The girl thought about that. Then she asked, "Do you think I could help people when I grow up?" Renee smiled, eyes warming. "You already are." As the sun dipped behind the hills of Pine Ridge, Renee Carter looked out over a community transformed, not perfect, not healed entirely, but awake. Awake to the truth, awake to its power, awake to the strength found in unity and courage. This was the America she believed in, the America she fought for, an America where justice belongs to everyone. Not just the powerful, not just the wealthy, not just the protected. Everyone. A stronger America begins with ordinary people choosing love over hate, courage over silence, unity over division. And Renee knew, if one person refused to accept injustice, and another joined them, and another, then no darkness, no matter how deep, could stand. Because the truth always rises, because the community always heals, because love, when courageous, is unstoppable. What happened in Pine Ridge wasn't just corruption. It wasn't just racism. It wasn't just a broken system. It was a reminder, a painful, undeniable reminder, that justice in America has never been automatic. It has always depended on ordinary people choosing to stand up, speak out, and protect one another even when it feels dangerous to do so. Judge Renee Carter didn't fight just for herself. She fought for Jasmine, for Deshaun, for families in Oakwood, for every person who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or unprotected. And her victory wasn't born from power alone. It was born from a community, from courage shared in whispers, from neighbors refusing to stay silent, from one honest officer willing to risk everything for the truth, from a sister who believed that documenting injustice was an act of love. This story teaches us something deeper than law and corruption. It teaches us who we must choose to be. We can choose fear, or we can choose courage. We can choose silence, or we can choose to speak. We can choose division, or we can choose to lift one another up and build an America worthy of every child who calls this country home. Because a stronger America doesn't begin in the halls of power. It begins in living rooms, in neighborhoods, in communities, with people who refuse to accept hate as normal and who choose instead to stand beside one another with love, empathy, and unshakable humanity. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the importance of standing together against injustice, then don't leave without taking action. Hit subscribe right now to join the racist reality community. Every subscription, every like, every shared video helps shine a light into places where silence has lived for too long. Visit the Racist Reality channel and watch more stories of courage, truth, and the fight for a better world. Stories that reveal not just the darkness, but the people are brave enough to rise against it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. Thank you for choosing compassion over apathy and justice over comfort. Together, we can build a more loving, united, and powerful America. One story, one voice, one courageous act at a time. Stay strong, stay aware, stay human, and we'll see you in the next video.